So when my family and I go to the movies, we play a game. During the previews, of which there are usually many, we play a game, and when we see a preview, after the preview, we either do this. Yes, it's a movie you'd want to see. Not so sure. Definitely not. And then this means we'll watch it on video. So we're going to play a game, and you're going to do that. All right? I'm going to make a statement, and all right, you ready? Okay, here we go. Yeah, right. I like to eat donuts. All right. I like to practice forgiveness. Really? Okay. Red card, yeah, red card. Sometimes I can be a revengeful person. Yeah, I'm non-committal on that one, okay. I probably need to forgive someone in my life. I probably need to be forgiven. No, okay. There's a limit to God's grace. I believe fairness is important. I have feelings about the Mueller report. I didn't say what kind, just feelings. All right, do you want me to continue this sermon or do you want it to go to video? All right, so why can forgiveness be so difficult for us? Well, for a lot of the things that we just thought about, revenge, grace, fairness, forgiveness can be difficult for many of us because we've been wronged and it's impacted us. And sometimes we carry guilt and shame. And forgiveness can really kind of go against our sense of fairness. The impulse for revenge is part of human nature. Psychologists Martin Daly and Margot Wilson studied 60 different cultures across the world, and they found in 95% of them, they had some sort of blood revenge. Now, let's be honest for a minute. Speaking of movies, we love to watch movies where the bad guy gets caught. Right? In fact, gets what she deserves. And much of the violence we watch in movies is revenge-based. Think about it. And I don't know about you, but I hate it when the movie ends and the wrong hasn't been righted. Hate that. Think about the expressions that we use. I don't get mad, I get even. She got what? Yeah, or what was coming to her. Serves her right. And we feel triumphant when a wrong is righted. Think about this image. I guess it's been in my mind because I saw it recently. Remember sometime during the first decade of the Iraq War, when a crane put a chain around Saddam Hussein's statue and pulled it down? Okay, regardless of what I felt about the war at that time, that felt good, right? Our foreign policy, often based on revenge. You bomb us, we bomb you more. We invert the golden rule, do unto others as they do unto you. And forgiveness can seem to unravel all those deeply held notions. Are you with me? Okay. Now remember the study I just said about studying 60 cultures? Well, another psychologist, Michael McCullough, looked at the same cultures, he found that 93% of them also displayed some examples of forgiveness or reconciliation. So we desire both. We have a desire, an impulse for revenge, but we also have a desire deep within us for forgiveness and or reconciliation. I went back to the Book of Joy by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama that we looked at a couple years ago. I went back and looked at that and was reminded of this. Primatologist Franz de Waal believes peacemaking activities are extremely common in the animal kingdom. Chimps kiss and make up, and other species do as well. Apes, sheep, goats, hyenas, and dolphins are all species that have some form of peacemaking activities. Then he points out, of the species that have been studied, only domestic cats have failed to show behavior that reconciles relationships after conflict. No surprise there. Well, I'm not sure of another way to say it, but it feels like we are a nation of cats right now. A couple of weeks ago in the Sunday New York Times, columnist David Brooks wrote an article entitled, "The Case for Reparations, a Slow Convert to the Cause." It's well worth the read, regardless of whether you agree with Brooks or not. But he's been traveling around the country for 2 years studying America's divides: urban-rural, red-blue, rich-poor. Makes a very compelling argument about the racial divide that he's been witnessing. And he says it this way: racial divide is born out of sin. He goes on to talk about what that means. The whole article had a mix of that in it, but this is what jumped out at me that he said: "We're a nation coming apart at the seams, a nation in which each tribe has its own narrative, and the narratives are generally resentment narratives." Does that ring true? Yeah. So we're in a cultural vacuum when it comes to forgiveness. And yet all the spiritual masters, the great religious traditions, teach forgiveness. And most recently, both the medical and scientific fields, the research has confirmed that unforgiveness not only impedes happiness, but it is emotionally and physically unhealthy. So let's reframe forgiveness for a minute, shall we? Let's reframe it, see if we can think about it differently. So let's by saying, reminding us what forgiveness is not. It is not an excuse for unjust behavior. It is not forgetting. In fact, sometimes we should never forget some things. It is not denying the hurt or the harm. It is not saying or minimizing even the impact that a wrong might have had on you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you must resume the relationship. Some relationships are unhealthy. It doesn't mean that the pain of those sinned against is ignored. It doesn't deny the evil in the world. Doesn't mean that there aren't consequences and that there doesn't need to be accountability. And it doesn't mean that at times you don't need to exit harmful relationships. So what does it mean? Can we have a new frame around forgiveness? What if forgiveness had nothing to do with the offender or the other person? What if forgiveness is only about you? Forgiveness is an act of self-healing and self-empowerment. It is not about the other person. Sorry, I didn't mean to point right at you. Yeah. Afraid I'm going to get red carded over here. All right. What if forgiveness is at its essence an act of self-empowerment and self-healing? What if it is as much about releasing yourself as it is releasing anyone else? Forgiveness is a return to wholeness, to freedom. Eva Kor is a Holocaust survivor, and Mengele experimented on Kor and her twin at Auschwitz. And both her parents and her twin died. She forgave him. In fact, she founded a center in Indiana to promote forgiveness. She says, I call it a miracle medicine. It's free, it works, and it has no side effects. One POW said to another, have you forgiven your captors yet? The other answered, I will never do that. And the other one said, then they still have you in prison, don't they? When Jesus said to Peter, not 7 times, this translation said 77 times, another translation says 70 times 7. The hyperbole of that was not to keep count, but that forgiveness is not an isolated act, but an ongoing activity, a posture in the world. And any of us who have lived in families know that the only way families continue to work is practicing continual forgiveness. All right, some other parents of teenagers, just give me a nod about that. Thank you. On both sides. I call it this way, this image. Think of yourself as a river and not a sponge. A river where things flow. Not a sponge where you absorb the hurts, the injuries, the wrongs. Forgiveness is a sign of strength. It is not a sign of weakness. Forgiveness has to be fierce. Arch Desmond Tutu, who knows quite a bit about being wronged, says that forgiveness is about being freed from the past, not tied to the past. He says, without forgiveness, we remain tethered to the person who harmed us. We are bound to the chains of bitterness, tied together, trapped. Until we can forgive the person who harmed us, that person holds the key to our happiness. That person will be our jailer. When we forgive, we take back control of our own fate and our own feelings. We become our own liberator. I release myself from being tethered to anyone or anything that has harmed me. You might say, because I don't know all your stories, I know some of them, you might say, I'm not even sure of how to do that. Start by saying aloud what I just said. I release. If you're not ready for forgiveness, try just release. You say, well, I'm not ready. Well, do you have even a desire to be ready? Because even a desire to be ready can be enough to take that first step of opening. Am I strong enough to see the person or persons who hurt me as more than the wrong they have done? Sometimes it takes a while. Father Boyle, who started Homeboy Ministries, works with the gangs in Los Angeles. His His writings have moved me so deeply. And he says the mark of the spiritually mature is always tenderness. Tenderness. That tenderness of heart. That fierce tenderness. So, are you ready to practice forgiveness? Amen.